I'm Angela Kennecke. My guest today was a probation and parole officer and trained social worker. But even with all that experience, Rod Courtney couldn't save his son, Chad, who was 38 when he died of fentanyl poisoning in 2016.
I see this so much with young people. They're talented, they're gregarious, they're outgoing, and he fit that bill.
Following his son's death, Rod has dedicated his life to helping those who suffer from substance use disorder and their families.
Because without hope, we have nothing.
Rod joins me now for this episode of Grieving Out Loud to talk about his advocacy work as executive director of Crush of Iowa, which stands for Community Resources to Stop Heroin, as well as how he's dealt with his own grief and helped support other parents. Well, Rod, I'm very sorry that similar circumstances and a similar mission now have brought us together, but I am so grateful to meet you.
Yeah, and you, Angela, thank you so much. It's, I've heard it said, and I'm sure you have too, it's like, we're now part of a club that we never wanted to be part of, and losing children to fentanyl poisoning or overdose, whatever you prefer. But no, thank you so much, and thank you for everything you're doing.
I think we have to call it poisoning. I mean, it's fentanyl poisoning. I think overdose is really a misnomer. I was just talking about that with someone today. But let's talk about your personal tragedy in losing your son, Chad. And Chad died in 2016, 2 years before I lost Emily. Things have changed a lot since 2016, but tell me what happened.
Well, our son, he died of fentanyl poisoning at the age of 38, and he had a long history of substance use disorders and brain health and things kind of throughout his adolescence on up. But he started out in high school kind of, I don't know, I would say typical. There's no such thing as typical anymore. Partying a little bit in high school and drinking. But it didn't just happen all of a sudden. I mean, when our son started at our local high school here, I mean, he went in, he was like, biggest goal was to be an Eagle Scout, and he was involved in wrestling, he was involved in football. He was like, and I see this so much with young people, they're talented, they're gregarious, they're outgoing, and he fit that bill. And at one point I asked him, I said, Chad, how did we get here? And this is just the progression of it. I mean, he started out, I went to school and somebody said, do you want to smoke some weed? He said, I turned him down. And then he's, again, a couple of times, hey, you want to go smoke some weed? No, and till eventually he said yes. And he told us at one point in time, he said, I can remember the very first time I smoked marijuana, but, he said, I can remember saying to myself, you mean I can feel like this every day? And that's how it started. I can feel like this every day.
I have to just inject here that I was on stage with a couple of people in Los Angeles who are recovering from opioid addiction. And both of them said that the first or second time they smoked marijuana, they knew they'd found what they'd been looking for. They were like, oh, wow, this is it for me. And that progressed to heroin use for both of these people, which I just think is really interesting.
Yeah, I hear that so many similar stories when we talk with parents about kind of the way that things started. And for Chad, it continued on. Like he went from kind of an average student, a very involved kind of kid, to eventually was like one treatment center after the other, up to about 18. And then even after that, I mean, then he started getting into legal problems. He started getting the OWIs and the probation and eventually a parole. He was sentenced to 18 months for multiple offense drunk drivings. Obviously he went to prison for that, and he came back. And every time he come back, he'd always have the fresh start mentality. This is a fresh start. And he had, in the 24 years, for the time, like we always go about 14 years to about 38 years. So in that 24-year time frame, he had periods of sobriety. He had periods of time that he had a job and things were going well. It wasn't like nonstop. There were periods of time that we thought, well, this is a very hopeful time. We're cautiously optimistic.
And he had children too.
He did. Yeah, that was the point. I'm going to say he was probably, I'm trying to think of the ages, probably about 32 years old. He has two little girls, and he had been probably not using. Well, he had the children at 32, but just before he passed away, he had not been using for about a year. And he got a construction job. He was doing quite well, working as a union carpenter here. And he injured his shoulder and he went to the hospital. And guess what the rest of the story is? Oxycontin. And ironically, it was the same hospital that he'd been, for treatment for a substance use disorder.
So did anybody at any point ever say, don't prescribe this guy opioids?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. I mean, and there's another story before this before he had gone to treatment. See, there's something about being like the parent of someone with a substance use disorder. At least our experience was sometimes it was chaotic enough when I start trying to put things on a timeline. It's like, no, was it this time or was it this time? Because it's almost like history repeats itself so much. He'd gone into one of our local hospitals here in Iowa, in Iowa City, and was seeking treatment. He was looking, he knew he was going to withdraw. He knew he was going to go into withdrawal. And he had burned enough bridges during the course of after the Oxycontin, with the doctors and the doctor shopping and on, that when he got to the hospital, it was kind of perceived as, here we go again. Here's somebody with some drug-seeking behavior, and they're just trying to avoid the withdrawal. And they saw him, I don't know what you want to call it, triaged him or what they did, but they kind of got him towards the door. They gave him some medication to help with withdrawal. They sent him to the local treatment center. That's all fine and well, but it's like on the way to the treatment center, he stopped the cab, he got out and he ingested every bit of medication. They gave him an overdose on that. So he wound up back in intensive care. And now we're scrambling for a treatment center because with people with opioid use disorders, it's like you always, again, our experience, I don't want to make this like across the board, but you just had these little windows of opportunity where you might be able to get your loved one into treatment. And this was going to be it. He's out of intensive, he's intensive care for 5 days, 3 days of which we didn't even know. But anyhow, so he, the next day, after they were getting ready to discharge him, it's like, can we find him treatment? He still wants to go to treatment, but they were saying it wasn't a substance use disorder. It was a mental health disorder, or they were not. I was saying, please have them come give him psychiatric evaluation. And the psychiatrist was outside of the room, walked up the nurse's station and says, where's the junkie? And he was there for like 3 minutes and he comes out and says, no, this is a substance use disorder. This has nothing to do with this. No, that's a substance use disorder. Just by the grace of God, there was this one nurse. There's always these little angels along the way. And she got us one more day. We got a treatment facility that would take him. Got him signed to that treatment facility, and they didn't want to take him. So now they didn't want to take him as a mental health patient. Got to the treatment facility and said, what is he doing here? This is a mental health concern. So they wanted to kick him out of treatment right then and there, but he made it. It's like this is just the revolving kind of thing that we went through for 24 years.
Oh, exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. Mm-hmm. And so failed by the system at every turn, right? And that there's a similarity with so many of these stories where the system, the mental health and the addiction treatment and just the medical system and the criminal justice system fails people because mental health and addiction go hand in hand. It's like the chicken and the egg. What causes what? Does the mental health issues cause people to use, or does the using cause the mental health issues? And we cannot we fail people. This society failed your son.
Yeah. Well, and Angela, to add to this, it's like, I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a person in long-term recovery. I've been in recovery for 38 years. During the course of this 24 years, I was a licensed social worker, a certified addictions counselor, a person in long-term recovery, who ultimately wound up working for probation and parole. It was like my whole life, I felt like there was this conflict because I could hear the people in the hallway saying, with the name calling and the words of hopelessness. It's like, if you don't have hope for the people you're working with, get out of the business, because without hope, we have nothing.
Well, I agree with that. That's why I named my charity Emily's Hope, because I feel so strongly about that. But I think your background and the fact that you were a probation officer, parole officer, like this should have set you up perfectly to know what to do for your own kid, right?
Yep.
And I think that about myself as a journalist. I'm not saying that in any way to be disrespectful, but I felt that way. Like, I know how to research things. I know how to figure things out and find things. Why can't I help my child?
Right. Because that's not there. I mean, what the services that are available are oftentimes so limited, are hard to get into. And the flip side of that for me was, like you were saying, it's like, I knew the system. I knew the places to go. What about the folks that don't? What about, it's like, how do they don't even know where to start so many times. Or if you're on your own, where do you start?
So ultimately, what led to Chad's death then?
It was a fentanyl poisoning. He'd been out of treatment, and he'd been out roughly, I want to say roughly 6 weeks. And, he's back. He was working day jobs. He was working, part-time kind of for hire type places. And he'd worked and had at some point had decided to use. And he called the person that he got his heroin from, and picked it up at McDonald's. A van drove up at McDonald's, and he got it. And then he injected there, and then overdosed, and then he later died at the hospital. But to add to the story, this same ultimately fentanyl, I would like to think that Chad did not know it was fentanyl, that he thought he was going to inject heroin, because we had so many conversations about our fear factor in this. Chad, we worry about you, and it's like, don't worry, I know my dose, and to avoid lessen the chances of overdose. Well, fairly common knowledge, that fentanyl is so dangerous and so unmanageable. 6 other people died within a 7-day time frame in Iowa City from the same drug.
It's a bad batch. And then they don't declare a public health emergency, as they should, to let everybody know who uses that people are dying from fentanyl in the supply. I mean, that doesn't happen. Did that happen during this time in 2016?
Yep. Yeah. All within like.
But no public health emergency was declared.
No, a matter of fact, I don't even remember reading about it in the newspaper. And again, these were not people that society likes to stereotype. These were people that worked in hospitals. These were people that, that were kind of like, had just got caught up along the way.
Yeah. Well, we need to get rid of all stereotypes. And I'm sure, you're 2 years ahead of me here. Chad died in 2016. Did you talk about it right away, or how did you cope?
I knew support groups, because of my own recovery, and I had a pretty good support system set up. My immediate family is amazing. Now, my extended family, not so much, and we can talk about that if you'd like. But Chad died in, November 1st of 2016. And then on March 3rd of 2017, we started our family and friends support group. And that came by way of Eastern Iowa Hearing Initiative in Iowa, obviously in high intensity drug trafficking areas. They had started some work. I'm still working probation and parole. They were coming out and doing presentations about, opioids and the comparison of everything from the morphine up to the fentanyl and the carfentanil. And so that was just that little bit of time frame. And I said it there. The first one they didn't even tell me about because it was too close. I went and sat and I listened to this police officer give this presentation, and I was like, how did I know so little? How was I so unaware when I really thought, I'm still working in the field?
Yeah, I felt that way too, because I was doing stories on overdoses. I was doing story on the day Emily died on Good Samaritan laws, so I felt like I knew, but I didn't know. And so I know so much more now. I think we all know more now, even people who haven't been personally touched by this epidemic. But I understand.
That what came from that was they said at that presentation, we're looking to start the called Crush. That was a name that we inherited, Crush, Community Resources United to Stop Heroin, Family and Friends Support Group. Well, I've had years of facilitation and group facilitation. And I went up to the Cedar Rapids police officer afterwards. I said, his name was Al. He said, Al, I'm all in. And that was 5 years ago. And it's been all in every day since then.
So you stopped working as a probation parole officer then and just do this full time?
I didn't retire in 2016. I didn't retire till 2018, August of 2018. So I kept working. Again, I started using the things that I knew and I had learned along the way then with my caseload. And what I could do there, because of kind of the background, they try to client match as much as possible. Of course, so here's somebody that's in recovery, and here's somebody that knows some more about the opioid epidemic until, it just kind of got to that point where I was of the right age and I had the right time. And so until just recently, really until just within the last month or so, everything we've done has just been completely volunteer. I didn't, we do this full time, but it wasn't until just this month that we've actually been given an opportunity to start a recovery community center. And my hope and my dream out of this recovery community center is that this is a center that's ran by the recovery community, and we can help fill those voids in the system when there's people waiting for bed space.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest void that needs to be filled? What is the mission of the Recovery Center?
Well, the recovery center, part of it, the philosophy is it's all recoveries. So, and that means it's like, if it's a 12-step program, that's great. If it's, whatever you think is your path for recovery, utilize that. And then along with that, our goal is to train peer support specialists, because there's just so much to be said for that. We met, it's almost like you can feel this kinship right away, because we both lost children. Right. Well, it's real similar with people with substance use disorders. It's like people with substance use disorders get people with substance use disorders, and they understand, and they come with this kind of this prepackaged empathy, and that's what we need, is the empathy. We need to get past the stigma and know that families whose father is a probation parole officer, a certified addictions counselor, and a social worker. You know what? It hits their families too. It's not, nobody's going to escape this living process unscathed. We're all going to have something. So there's that, and just to have that place where people can come, and if they want to seek medically assisted treatment, some of the 12-step programs don't agree with medically assisted treatment. Our mantra is no judgment.
What works for you? What works for you?
Yeah. And so that's it.
Do you ever get frustrated? I get a little frustrated because I think about the number of overdose deaths have increased exponentially since Chad died, since Emily died, and they just keep going up, 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 up. And it feels like you're sort of screaming into like some kind of wind tunnel or something,
Yeah, I have. And even recently, again, it's like, with the year that Chad died, I can't remember, it was either 72 or 73,000 people died from overdose death overall. For me, that was just unfathomable that there's not more being done. And there were some steps made, there were some monies made available, and there was, some things happened. So here we are, we're at it for 5 years, and now we get the numbers for this year, and it's 103,000.
Well, it's actually 106. November of 2020 through November of 21, according to the CDC, that 1 year period it's gone up even more. Because I just checked it.
Yeah.
No, you can't. No, you can't.
And the rest of it is like, they've seized enough fentanyl at the border, and without bringing politics in, to kill. I heard this the other day, 90 million people. 90 million. It's like, that's a big part of our population. So this is going to be something that we as a society and as different, as a country, are going to deal with for years to come, because there's enough fentanyl out there to kill whole towns.
I have people ask me sometimes, is it hard for me, to work in this area, to educate people, reduce stigma, get people into treatment, all of the things that we do in prevention, all the things that we do at Emily's Hope after losing a child? Is it hard to be so immersed in this every day? Day in, day out? I would ask the same question of you.
Initially, yes. For the first few months, we had a tour of the Recovery Community Center today with some of our board members and community members. And I told him, I said, I can remember some days when I got ready to put my feet on the floor, it's like the floor was 19 feet down there. And after, I don't even know how long after Chad first passed away, I can remember, oh, by in the morning, like a lot of people do. And it's kind of like, oh, I slept pretty good. You kind of think about your day and then click, my son's dead. It would hit like that. And somehow, I managed to keep getting out of bed, going to work, and I found purpose. I found purpose in all that. So they were. So anyhow, we started speaking around Iowa, and we went up to a school up in Cherokee, Iowa, which is about, I don't know, 4 hours from here. And we spoke to 3 different schools, kind of 5 different groups, parent groups, and things. We tell Chad's story, because of the progression of addiction and the impact on families, etc. And we had an opportunity to go talk with the nurses and doctors at their local hospital, about prescribing practices, and told the story. And one of the nurses looked at me and she said, "You're not bitter." And I don't know how we're probably a year into it. And I've been angry. I mean, I've been angry with the system. I've been angry with the people that sold Chad the drugs. I've been angry with myself for not knowing more. And she said, "You're not bitter." And I thought, I'm not. I'm dedicated. I'm motivated. So she said to me, she said, "We must have a very strong spiritual base." And that was an easy way out for me. Well, yeah, that's what it must be. And I thought about that for the 4-hour drive back. It's like, where's the bitter? And I didn't fall into the why me's, because as a parent of an opioid addict, you kind of go to bed every night with knowing that that's the chance. And then
I always say, why not me? Instead of why me, why not me?
Yes.
But tell me, what was your realization there when you were driving?
Well, it was like, if I get bitter and if I get so angry, that's just going to burn up energy that I could put to better use. And then if I did that, and no, anger and bitterness leads to sickness and mental illness and on and on and on,
Right.
Heroin wins. Heroin was going to win, and I was going to be darned if heroin was going to win. So I worked diligently at trying to stay, on top of things the best I can. I still have days that, what, a good cry is just in order.
Yes.
He just had his birthday on May 16th.
Oh,
and
and that's the date of Emily's death, May 16th.
Wow.
It was a very hard day for me. So I'll think about Chad now too on May 16th.
Yeah, well, thank you. So, yeah, it's a journey, isn't it? It's just like, I don't know. I saw a post somewhere that said, something that once broke me in half has made me twice as strong. And it kind of, that resonated with me. I don't know where it comes from, but it's a lot of these things that you pick up along the way. It's like, yeah, I think that it has. And this is what Chad wanted. I mean, he told us after one of his treatment experiences, he said, "I just want to make a difference, Dad." So
so you're doing it for him. You're doing it for him.
We really strive to do it, yeah, absolutely, for him and in his spirit, and I wish I had his gusto and his personality, because he's an amazing, loving human being.
Yeah, so many amazing, loving human beings lost in this horrible epidemic that's going on in our country. And I wondered I know you have these support groups for parents, right? And I wondered how that worked, because one thing, I had just written a blog not that long ago, I think it was on Mother's Day, I wrote it actually, about how people will come up to me, parents, and will say, "My child died too, but it wasn't from drugs." Which, I mean, it doesn't matter. Losing a child is losing a child. So I wondered if you found that having a support group of people who've lost children in a similar way is beneficial.
I think it was probably critical in our own recovery and in our mourning process. We contacted some grieving groups, and again, like going to some of our other support groups and talking there. But it was just, and maybe some of this was me, but there was just something about when you said, "I'm really struggling right now. I just lost a son to fentanyl poisoning," and I think I was called an overdose at the time, but fentanyl poisoning. And people, when you try to address somebody that lost a child under any circumstance, but this was just like people with kind of that moment. So when we found people, again, that kinship, when we started gathering people together under similar circumstances, it was like that aha moment was like, I hear you. I feel you. I empathize and connect with your pain. And, to take the crush approach a little bit further, I mean, what we've done in this realization, back when I was still working as the certified addiction counselor, we have to get CEUs and go to trainings and things. Well, one year I wound up at a Native American conference, Native American convention, and they talked about, working with Native Americans with substance use disorders and tying in like 12 steps with their beliefs. And somebody spoke at that conference and said, with indigenous people, when there's a problem in the community, they bring the community together. They bring their spiritual leaders, they bring their medicine people, they bring their elders, they bring the people that are having the struggles, they bring the family members, and they sit and they talk. So when Crush started, there's two things that I really wanted to emphasize. That's that we sat in a circle as a community, and we brought everybody in we could, whether it's family members. We Zoom into treatment centers. We have people from treatment centers join us. We have people that are in recovery, people looking to get in recovery. We have substance abuse professionals. The list goes on, because when there's a problem in the community, who better to solve it than the community and the recovery community? The people that have walked this, whether it's with a loved one or actually dealt with a substance use disorder, they're the professionals. They're the people with the knowledge.
So what do you think it's going to take to start seeing these overdose deaths numbers coming down? I mean, I know you're doing everything in your little corner of the world. I'm doing everything in my little corner of the world. But it doesn't seem to be enough. So what will it take?
I wish I had a better answer for this. And probably 5 years ago, I would have, I would have had some kind of an answer, because, over the years that I worked around this, I've watched this cycle. It's about every 10-year cycle where something will come on scene. People use it, or like a generation will use it. It'll go up and they start saying, well, my friends are dying, they're losing jobs, they're losing homes, and then it drops off. But this time, because there's so much, and this is just kind of my hypothesis, this is a theory, but there's so much fentanyl on the street, so much pouring in, and there's so many analogs out there. It's like, right. I don't know. It's not going to be just like this normal cycle where people say, I'm seeing too many of my friends die. It's like, what do I think will help is like anything else. Their heroin right now is cheap, because it's old fashioned supply and demand, and there's so much fentanyl on the street. I mean, it's going to take some of that enforcement piece of it. It's going to take everything. This is such a multifaceted problem until we all get on the same page with this. And I mean, from our politicians down. And that's a tall order, isn't it?
That's a very tall order. I was going to say, nobody in this country seems to be able to get on the same page for anything these days. We had a global pandemic and people couldn't get on the same page, Is that the truth? That's what terrifies me, actually.
I don't know. I really like to spread hope, but it's going to take so much. And I really think it's going to take a lot of these grassroots, a lot of people like us coming out and sharing and beating down the stigma around this. If we could address the stigma, I think the AIDS epidemic is probably the best example that comes to mind for me.
I always say that. I always say, liken it to the AIDS epidemic. Yeah. Because it took a bunch of angry moms basically to quit writing fake obituaries and march on to Washington and get the funds to find solutions, right? To keep people alive.
Yeah.
And to get rid of the stigma. Yeah. I know it's tough, but let's maybe go to a little bit more manageable subject than how to solve the problem. You're a counselor, you've been through this grief. A lot of people listening to my podcast may have just lost someone. They may have just been referred to the podcast. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice or anything that helped you cope that you could offer up to those who are newly grieving?
I can only speak to my experience, because like we said earlier, I don't think there's any one path, and I think that holds true for grieving too. I think people will, find a path, but I can tell you what worked for me was finding somebody that shared a similar experience, as sad as that is, and to be able to, again, to join with each other and to know that you're not alone. and to know this is happening repeatedly every day. And, I don't know how else to put this, but it really sucks. And
It sucks.
yeah,
It
it just
sucks.
sucks. Yeah. And it's like, I know it took somebody that had a similar experience to sit down, because I loved all the condolences, and all the thoughts and all the prayers and everything. But finally somebody just sat down and looked me in the face and said, Rod, I'm sorry, this really sucks. And I was like, you're right. This is one of the most painful things that I hope I ever have to live through. And to find somebody that you can really just share with, it's that human connection. It's having a human connection. And of course, COVID has made that a challenge, but to have that type of connection and know you're not alone. I hear this much, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
There's nothing you could have done to change this outcome.
That's the thing. Sometimes I think dads have a little easier time with that than moms in some ways, because we feel like everything is because of us, everything we do, and my daughter had every opportunity and everything you could possibly have. And it's hard. And then you think about all the years you spent with them and all the years you spent parenting them. And you wonder, like, what was that for?
Yeah.
It's tough.
My wife does a really good job of explaining this. And it goes, hopefully I can get this as right as possible, but it's like there is a connection between a mother and a child. It's like, for me, when we're dealing with my alcohol use disorder, and to kind of go along the lines of Al-Anon and responsibility and don't enable and to do all those things, that flies in the face of a mother and that maternal love. It's something that I can't understand and never will understand. It's like she carried that child for 9 months. And it's a phrase that we've dubbed, it's called umbilical energy, that she feels that child. She feels the love of that child. And so when it comes to the mothering part of parenthood, it is a very different experience. I mean, I think some of my initial coping skills was just to kind of be angry. It's like, oh, why didn't you just listen? Why couldn't you just listen? And so it's like, you had all these things laid out in front of you, and then angry because even in death, it's still bringing pain to the family. Whereas, historically speaking, fathers have a tendency to see themselves as a protector. So now I've let my family down. So it's an interesting take. I mean, I don't, I'll never understand umbilical energy, but she does.
I always say that I still feel connected to my child through what I would call the golden umbilical cord, which is to me a spiritual thing. Tell your wife I appreciate that sentiment, because yes, I think it's true. There's just a different connection, and there's a connection with the father of children, obviously. It's just different. Mm-hmm. It's just different. I wanted to just thank you for all the time that you spent with me talking about this and sharing your son's story and all of your efforts that you're doing with Crush.
Well, and absolutely. And thank you for having me. And again, know that Debbie and my wife, Debbie, and I send you and your family our most sincere condolences and wish you the best on your journey, through this, and bless your hearts for taking this and doing something good with it. It's making a difference.
Right back at you. Ditto.
Right back at you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you for joining us. To read my blogs and for more information on how to get involved with Emily's Hope, just go to emilyshope.foundation. For now, wishing you faith, hope, and courage.